Elias Thorne remembered the precise moment his old life fractured beyond repair. It was a Tuesday in late autumn, the kind of day in the sprawling metropolis of Viridian City, where the sky hung like a bruised canvas, pressing down on the gleaming towers. He had walked into his minimalist, impeccably designed kitchen, the scent of a celebratory truffle pasta he'd picked up from the gourmet market still clinging to his jacket, only to find Serafina, his wife of 18 years, waiting. She slid the divorce papers across the polished granite island as if it were a casual shopping list. Her cream-colored silk blouse seemed to glow in the dim light, a stark contrast to the cold in her eyes. "I'm not wasting my future on a man who's going to fail," she stated, her voice devoid of emotion, a perfectly crafted sentence. 8 years later, in a ballroom shimmering with the elite of global innovation, she would hear his new name, not just a whispered recognition, but a resounding call from the stage. But on that grim afternoon, Elias was merely a 44-year-old architect, standing in his own kitchen, staring at the stark legal documents, while his 3-year-old son, Leo, pushed a toy drone across the herringbone floor, making gentle whirring sounds. His tie, loosened in anticipation of celebration, still hung around his neck. The resignation letter confirming his departure from Sterling and Associates, a firm he'd dedicated nearly 2 decades to, where he'd risen to lead architect of urban infrastructure, was still folded neatly in his coat pocket. He'd envisioned Serafina's smile, a rare radiant thing he hadn't seen often enough in recent years. Foolish, he now realized. Utterly naive. For 18 years, he had designed the skeletal structures of smart cities, the intricate veins of eco-friendly transport networks, the soaring glass facades of corporate powerhouses. He started as a junior drafter, moved through project management, and eventually directed entire urban renewal initiatives. It was a life of prestige, a 6-figure salary, benefits that rivaled small nations, the kind of career people envied. But for 6 years after Leo's bedtime stories, after the hum of the automated cleaning system subsided, Elias had retreated to his basement studio. Fueled by black coffee and an insatiable drive, he'd been building something else. A revolutionary AI-driven platform for predictive energy grid optimization. It wasn't glamorous. It was algorithms, sensor data, holographic simulations, and endless lines of code. But it worked. He believed it worked. 2 weeks prior, a venture capital firm in Neo-Kyoto, a city synonymous with technological advancement, had offered him seed funding, substantial funding, enough to assemble a small team and pilot the system in their dense, interconnected energy infrastructure. There was one unwavering condition: he had to commit full-time. No safety net, no corporate paycheck, no divided loyalties. So he had resigned. He had braced himself for Serafina's fear, perhaps her anger, certainly a protracted argument. He had not anticipated divorce papers. She stood opposite him, her arms folded, her wedding ring still on, yet subtly turned inward, as if she wished to shield her eyes from its gleam. "You already had these ready?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. She didn't blink. "Yes." The single word landed with the force of a physical blow. Leo, oblivious, made a soft buzzing sound with his toy drone. "Daddy, sky," he murmured, pointing upwards. Elias looked down at his son, then back at Serafina. "How long?" he pressed. Her lips thinned. "A few weeks. A few weeks," he repeated, a tremor in his voice. "So, while I was trying to figure out how to tell you about the funding, you were talking to a lawyer. I was protecting myself from your decisions." The words were a venomous dart, piercing his composure. He slowly pulled out a kitchen stool and sat, his knees popping softly, a new symptom of his 40s. His mind latched onto the small, insignificant sound, desperate for an escape from the crushing reality. "Serafina," he began, his voice low, controlled. "This isn't some mad impulse I woke up with this morning. You've seen me pour my life into this. You know what this could become." She let out a short, hollow laugh. Not loud, but infinitely worse, weary, cynical. "I know what men say when they want their wives to gamble everything. That's not fair." "No," she countered, pointing a finger at the papers. "What's not fair is you deciding to abandon a stable career at your age and expecting me to applaud like you're 25 with nothing to lose." At your age, that phrase echoed in his mind, sharp and insistent. He was 44, not decrepit. But in that moment, she made him feel like he was well past the age where a man was permitted to chase a dream, to stumble, to rebuild. "I'm not asking for applause," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I'm asking you to believe in me." Her face shifted, a flicker of something beneath the anger. For a fleeting second, he saw fear. "My father said the same thing," she whispered. Elias stopped. He knew the story. Her father had lost his small architectural practice when Serafina was 12. Their family home had been foreclosed, her mother forced to work grueling double shifts. Serafina recounted it as a visceral memory, a scar that still pulsed beneath her skin. "I'm not your father," Elias said, his voice firm. "No," she retorted, "but you sound exactly like him." The rain intensified, drumming against the window panes. Leo's toy drone bumped against Elias's shoe. "Crash!" the boy exclaimed, looking up, a wide, innocent grin on his face. Elias forced a smile for him. Serafina didn't. She tapped the divorce papers with two manicured fingers. "I'm done living next to a countdown clock. A countdown clock until we lose this penthouse. Until your investors vanish. Until I'm the one trying to hold everything together while you chase another version of yourself." Another version of myself. That was the moment clarity struck. This wasn't solely about financial stability or perceived risk. She had already written his ending, cast him as a failure. No evidence he offered, no future he painted, would ever alter that predetermined narrative. He rose and walked to the high-tech sink, not because he had anything to do there, but because he needed to turn away before he uttered words he could never retract. The truffle pasta sat on the counter in its elegant container, a mock celebration dinner. God, he felt stupid. "Is there someone else?" he asked, the question tasting like ash in his mouth. She glanced towards the hallway. That was answer enough. "Who?" "Nobody you need to worry about." He let out a single humorless laugh. "That's a rather peculiar thing to say to your husband, soon-to-be ex-husband." The room fell silent, save for the gentle clicking of Leo's toy wheels on the polished floor. Elias looked at his son, his hair delightfully disheveled from his nap, a smudge of fruit puree on his sleeve. "What about him?" he asked, his voice thick with unasked fears. Serafina's jaw tightened. "We'll work that out." But it was far from easy. The ensuing 5 months were a silent, brutal war of attrition, the kind of quiet devastation only divorce can wreak. Not screaming matches in courtrooms, no dramatic scenes in the driveway of their luxurious high-rise, just an endless stream of terse emails, glacial attorneys, meticulously itemized bank statements, and rigid custody schedules. Two adults, learning the chilling depths of their own capacity for coldness when every sentence was filtered through legal counsel. Initially, Serafina demanded primary custody. Then, Neo-Kyoto became a tangible reality. The investor insisted Elias be on site by early spring. The pilot program, the very heartbeat of his dream, required his constant presence. He couldn't build an international tech company from Viridian City. Serafina flatly refused to relocate. "I have a life here," she declared during mediation. "So does Leo." Elias retorted, his voice strained. She looked away. Her new life, he would later discover, was already taking shape. Intimate dinners she labeled industry networking events. A man from the exclusive world of high finance, a figure radiating wealth, certainty, and no little boy demanding synthetic pancakes at 6 a.m. He wouldn't pretend it didn't ignite a searing anger within him. It did. But anger, he quickly learned, was useless when packing a child's suitcase. Eventually, after weeks of agonizing negotiation, she conceded. Leo would live with Elias overseas. There would be scheduled video calls, extended summer visits, holidays when feasible, and Elias would cover all travel costs once the company found its footing. The mediator, ever the professional, called it a difficult but workable arrangement. Elias called it heartbreaking. The morning they departed, Viridian City International Airport hummed with the scent of overpriced coffee, damp coats, and industrial floor cleaner. Leo, clutching Elias's hand with sticky fingers, wore a small backpack shaped like a miniature space shuttle. Elias carried one small suitcase, a carry-on, a folder brimming with legal documents, and a fear so profound it vibrated in his teeth. Serafina arrived but didn't linger. She hugged Leo, kissed the top of his head, and told him to be good for Daddy. Then she looked at Elias. For a split second, he thought he saw a flicker of softness, a chink in her polished armor. Instead, she said, "Don't make him pay for your dream." He swallowed hard, the words catching in his throat. "I won't." She nodded, a gesture of disbelief, and walked away without another glance. Leo tugged his hand. "Daddy, Mommy coming?" Elias crouched down, his knees aching with a familiar throb. His chest, however, hurt far worse. "Not today, buddy," he said, forcing a smile. "But you and me were going on an adventure." Leo gazed out at the vast terminal windows, at the sleek airships docked outside, at the gray morning beyond them. "Do they have space shuttles there?" Elias smiled, a fragile, desperate thing. If he didn't, he might have shattered right there in Terminal C. "I bet they do." Leo nodded, satisfied. That was the magic of little children. Sometimes they trusted you before you'd even begun to earn it. Elias carried him onto the airship, Leo's space shuttle backpack pressed against his chest, his entire old life dissolving behind him. He told himself he was doing the right thing. He told himself he could build this company. He told himself Leo would understand one day. But 3 years later, sitting alone in a Neo-Kyoto office at 3:17 in the morning, staring at a payroll account that was almost empty, Elias would realize Serafina might have been right about one thing. Dreams could crash, and his was plummeting fast. 3 years after Leo and Elias landed in the shimmering, futuristic cityscape of Neo-Kyoto, Elias found himself utterly alone in their modest office, the digital clock on his screen glowing 3:17 a.m. He was staring at a payroll account that had less than 2 weeks of operational funds left. Not 2 months, not another fiscal quarter, 2 weeks. The office's aged climate control unit rattled above his desk like a dying automaton. Outside the panoramic window, Neo-Kyoto pulsed with an ethereal glow. A labyrinth of holographic billboards, self-driving vehicles tracing crimson light trails, a city that perpetually moved forward, leaving him stranded. One hand rested on his holographic mouse, the other wrapped around a paper cup of synth coffee so bitter it tasted scorched. His eyes felt gritty, sandblasted. His lower back was a rigid knot from yet another night spent on the office's utilitarian sofa, and his right knee, a silent chronic companion, had started aching whenever the city's atmospheric processors kicked in to dissipate the perpetual humidity. That was a detail nobody warned you about when you dared to become a bold entrepreneur in your 40s. Your dreams might be youthful, but your joints were decidedly not. He reopened the financial spreadsheet, a futile hope stirring that the numbers might miraculously reconfigure themselves if he stared long enough. They didn't. Rent for the server farm, salaries for his skeletal team, cloud hosting fees, legal retainers, Leo's advanced schooling tuition, synth food rations, medical insurance. Every single number seemed to possess sharp, predatory teeth. His comlink buzzed. For one foolish second, he imagined it might be a new investor. It was a message from Leo's after-school program. "Mr. Thorne, Leo was picked up late again today. Please see the front office tomorrow." Elias closed his eyes. "Damn it," he whispered, a sound barely audible, just enough to confirm his own pervasive sense of failure. That was the deepest cut. Not the crushing financial pressure, not the ceaseless nights, not even the terrifying prospect of returning to Viridian City with nothing but an embarrassed face and a worn suitcase. It was the small, ordinary disappointments he inflicted upon his son. The first iteration of their core software, Viridian Grid Guardian 1.0, had launched 6 months earlier. He'd named it with a confidence he prayed would manifest in its performance. It hadn't. During a crucial pilot test at a sprawling municipal energy hub in the bustling district of Shinjuku South, the central dashboard froze completely. One of their advanced quantum sensors kept misreading vibrational data from a primary power conduit. The predictive model, meant to flag critical anomalies hours in advance, identified a system failure 3 hours after it had already occurred, plunging a sector of the district into a brief, localized blackout. The project manager, a no-nonsense woman named Director Kenji, stood beside him, her expression unreadable behind her safety goggles. She didn't yell. That somehow was worse. She simply stated, "I appreciate your ambition, Mr. Thorne, but I cannot endorse software that tells me yesterday's news." Elias tried to explain that the AI model required more training data, more real-world exposure. She held up one hand, a gesture of finality. In urban grid management, yesterday is expensive. That line seared itself into his memory. Yesterday is expensive for. By the end of that week, they lost the pilot. By the end of that month, their biggest investor, a powerful consortium in the Neo-Kyoto financial district, informed him they were recessing exposure. That was the polite, corporate way of saying they were abandoning ship before it sank. Elias called their lead representative, Mr. Sato, from a deserted stairwell, desperate to spare his team the humiliation. Mr. Sato, we're close, he pleaded. We've identified the core issue. Give us 90 days. There was a long pause on the line. You're a capable engineer, Mr. Thorne. Elias detested conversations that began with compliments. But we no longer see a clear path to scalable integration at this juncture. Elias looked down at his worn shoes. The sole of his left one had begun peeling near the toe, a minor detail he'd been meaning to address for 6 months. So that's it? We will honor what has already been committed. That will cover one more payroll cycle. I am truly sorry. Elias almost laughed, a dry, bitter sound. Sorry didn't keep the lights on. 2 employees resigned the following Monday. One left a printed resignation on his desk, meticulously formatted. The other, a young, brilliant coder named Hiroki, couldn't meet his gaze when he delivered the news. My wife is expecting, Mr. Thorne, he mumbled, rubbing the back of his neck. I can't ride this out. I understand, Elias told him, and he truly did. That was the problem. He understood everyone else's fears, everyone else's need for stability, everyone else's pragmatism, everyone's except his own. That night, he digitally sold his old custom-built drone in Viridian City, which had been gathering dust in his brother's garage since he left. He used the meager funds to cover the next round of salaries. When the transfer cleared, he sat in a plastic chair outside Leo's small bedroom in their cramped Neo-Kyoto apartment, and cried so quietly he gave himself a pounding headache. The next morning, Leo emerged in his space-themed pajamas, finding Elias making synth toast. Dad, why are your eyes red? Allergies, Elias mumbled, hoping the lie would suffice. We don't have flowers here. Neo-Kyoto has everything, buddy. Leo, ever the literalist, pondered this. Then he climbed onto a stool. Can I have nut butter? Of course. Elias spread the paste onto toast with one hand, simultaneously typing a response to a supplier email with the other. Leo watched him for a while, his small face thoughtful. Are you going to work again tonight? Elias kept his eyes on the toast. Probably. But you said we'd build the space station module. I know. You forgot last time too. There were sentences from children that carried no anger, yet cut deeper than any adult accusation. Elias put the knife down. Leo, look at me. Leo looked up, his cheeks still soft with a lingering baby roundness. Though he was 6 by then, a miniature echo of Seraphina's sharp chin and Elias's own intense gaze. I'm trying to build something that's going to give us a better life, Elias explained, the words feeling hollow even to his own ears. Leo nodded, but he didn't understand. How could he? Better life was an adult construct, a distant promise. Children understood presence. They understood who showed up. I just want you to come home before I'm asleep, Leo said, his voice small. That day, Elias left the office at 6 p.m., not midnight, not after one more bug fix, 6 o'clock. They built the intricate Lego space station module on the living room floor of their tiny apartment while the city's perpetual rain pattered against the balcony rail outside. Elias, in a moment of reckless culinary abandon, burned frozen synth dumplings for dinner. Leo laughed so hard he nearly toppled over. Dad, these are rocks. They're artisan dumplings, Elias countered, pulling a serious face. Very rare style, black. Leo giggled. A smear of nut butter still somehow on his chin from breakfast. For 2 hours, Elias wasn't a struggling founder. He wasn't a divorced man. He wasn't a middle-aged fool desperately trying to prove he hadn't irrevocably ruined his life. He was just Dad. Then, after Leo fell asleep, Elias opened his datapad again at the kitchen table. This became their rhythm. Daytime for survival, evenings for Leo, nights for the company. He aged 5 years in one. More silver threaded his temples. His physician warned him his blood pressure was alarmingly high. He started keeping holographic reading glasses in 3 different locations because he constantly misplaced them. Once, during a crucial client presentation, he momentarily forgot the word interoperability, standing there with a frozen smile, while his brain felt like it had stepped out for a smoke break. Still, they persisted. The breakthrough didn't arrive from a colossal corporation or some dramatic investor meeting. It emerged from a small, family-owned automated manufacturing plant outside Neo-Kyoto's industrial district. Precision Robotics. They produced custom-designed robotic components for deep-sea mining equipment. Nothing flashy, just a meticulously run, stubborn business founded by a woman named Nora Jennings, whose grandfather had established the place in 2045. Nora agreed to a trial because her chief of operations, Hiroshi, had heard about Elias's platform from a mutual contact in the Viridian City tech community. On their first video call, Nora squinted at the screen. "You're the man who used to work at Sterling & Associates, aren't you?" "I am, and now you're in Neo-Kyoto." "Yes, ma'am." She leaned back in her ergonomic chair. "That's either impressive or concerning." Some days, Elias admitted, it's both. She let out a single sharp laugh. That laugh, he realized much later, probably saved him. The first month, their system, now rebranded as GridWise AI, accurately predicted a critical bearing failure on one of their complex robotic arms days before it would have seized. The second month, it flagged an abnormal energy signature on a primary power conduit. By the third month, Nora called him from her office, Hiroshi standing behind her, both looking as though they'd witnessed a conjuring trick. "You saved us almost 42 hours of unscheduled downtime," she said, a hint of awe in her voice. Elias couldn't speak immediately. He couldn't. Hiroshi leaned towards the camera. "You still there?" "Yeah," Elias managed, clearing his throat. "I'm here." Nora smiled, a genuine warm smile. "Good. Send me a contract." After the call ended, Elias sat alone in the office, his hands clasped over his mouth, a quiet sob escaping. Then he called Leo. It was late afternoon, school hours for Leo, who answered from the aftercare room, his face too close to the screen. "Dad," Elias began, his voice cracking. "Buddy, I think we got one." "One what?" Leo asked, his eyes wide. "A customer." Elias laughed, a joyous, almost disbelieving sound. "A real one." Leo grinned. "So, can we get synth pizza?" That was Leo, his little business partner, straight to the priorities. "Yes," Elias promised. "We can get synth pizza," Precision Robotics told another plant owner in Yokohama. He told a robotics consultant in Seoul. That consultant introduced them to a large-scale agricultural automation company in Singapore. It wasn't overnight. Nothing truly worthwhile ever was. But slowly, painstakingly, the holographic comlink began to ring for reasons other than impending doom. By year 5, they were barely breaking even. By year 6, Elias hired back Hiroki, the young engineer who had quit. By year 7, they opened a small North American office in Viridian City, a mere 15 minutes from the towering glass edifice where his old life had ended. He didn't tell Serafina. There was no point. Their emails were almost exclusively about Leo's travel schedule, school reports, and summer visits. She remained polite, distant. Sometimes she missed scheduled calls. Sometimes Leo pretended it didn't bother him. But Elias saw the subtle way he checked the time, the flicker of disappointment in his eyes. One morning in their Neo-Kyoto office, Elias arrived early with his synth coffee and found Leo asleep on the small couch near his desk. He was 11 then, all gangly elbows and worn sneakers, visiting during a school break. He had covered himself with the same small, faded blanket he'd once draped over Elias during one of his own late-night collapses. On the clear glass whiteboard behind him, 3 words were scrawled in blue marker. "Dad doesn't quit." Elias stood there for a long time, the words burning into his soul. Not because everything was fixed. It wasn't. But because for the first time in years, he felt a profound sense of peace, a quiet assurance that maybe, just maybe, he hadn't dragged his son into an unmitigated disaster. Maybe he had taught him something invaluable. A week later, just after 6 a.m., while Neo-Kyoto was still stirring to life, and the office smelled of synth coffee and ozone from the 3D printers, Elias opened his inbox. There was an email from a name he hadn't seen in years. Victor Sterling. Asterisk. His former boss at Sterling and Associates. The subject line was short, cryptic. Urgent, we need to talk. Elias stared at Victor Sterling's email for almost a full minute before his finger finally tapped to open it. That name, Victor Sterling, carried a profound weight. Not because Elias harbored hatred for him. He didn't. Hate, he'd learned, was an exhausting luxury, one he couldn't afford when most of his energy was consumed by payroll spreadsheets, debugging software, managing Leo's school schedule, and desperately trying to hide his own fear from his son. But Victor had been the last person to shake his hand at Sterling and Associates before Elias walked out of that magnificent building 8 years prior. Back then, Victor had leaned against his sleek, minimalist desk, arms folded over his impeccably tailored blue suit, and declared, Elias, I respect your drive, but AI-driven grid optimization is a niche fantasy. You're trading a sure thing for a maybe. A sure thing. Elias remembered driving home that day, his resignation accepted, a fragile hope blossoming that Serafina might still stand by him. By dinner, she'd handed him divorce papers. Now, Victor wanted to talk. His email was concise, just 4 lines. Elias, I hope you are well. I will be in Neo-Kyoto next month and would appreciate the chance to meet privately. Sterling and Associates is reassessing several strategic priorities, and your name has come up. This is important. Victor. Elias read it twice, then placed his comlink face down on his desk. Across the open plan office, Leo was quietly eating nutrient paste from a compostable bowl, engrossed in his virtual homework at the conference table. He was 11 then, tall for his age, with Serafina's sharp chin and Elias's nervous habit of chewing the inside of his cheek when deep in thought. He looked up, sensing Elias's shift in mood. Bad news? Not sure yet, Elias replied. That means maybe. Leo's eyes twinkled. Elias smiled. You're getting too smart. That means yes. Elias took off his holographic reading glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. The office smelled of lingering synth coffee and the faint metallic tang of newly printed schematics. Outside, Neo-Kyoto was already ablaze with the morning sun, that heavy, humid heat pressing against the windows even before 8 a.m. An old boss wants to meet, Elias explained. The one from Viridian City, one of them. Is he the guy Mom said was smart? The question caught Elias off guard. He looked at Leo. When did she say that? Leo shrugged, attempting a casual nonchalance that only children could manage when they knew they'd revealed more than intended. On a video call once. She said you used to work under a guy who really knew how business worked. A familiar knot tightened in Elias's chest. Not anger exactly, but the dull ache of an old bruise unexpectedly bumped. Well, he said carefully, he did know business, just not my business. Leo spooned more nutrient paste into his mouth and nodded, as if that explained everything. It didn't. 3 weeks later, Victor Sterling walked into their Neo-Kyoto office, impeccably dressed in a navy suit that likely cost more than Elias's first used hovercar. He looked older, but not significantly so. Some men aged as if they were perpetually negotiating with time itself. Victor had more silver at his temples, deeper lines etched around his piercing eyes, but retained the same polished confidence, the same carefully measured smile. Elias, he said, extending a perfectly manicured hand. You look well. Elias shook it firmly. You too, Victor. Victor's eyes swept across the office. Glass partitions, engineers at standing workstations. A whiteboard filled with complex failure rate algorithms. Nothing ostentatious, but undeniably vibrant, alive, humming. This is impressive, he conceded. Thank you. I remember when you had half these ideas scribbled in a dog-eared notebook. I remember being told the market wasn't ready, Elias retorted, a faint edge to his voice. Victor smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. I may have been mistaken about that. There it was. Not an apology, but close enough to make the air in the room feel suddenly denser. They sat in the conference room. Amelia Chen, Elias's brilliant CFO, joined them for the first 10 minutes, efficiently laying out financial summaries, client growth projections, and their current North American expansion plans. Victor listened intently, asking incisive, probing questions. He was not stupid. He never had been. After Amelia excused herself, Victor leaned back in his chair, visibly loosening his tie. Sterling and Associates has a problem, he stated, his gaze direct. That's usually why people fly 14 hours. He offered a dry, humorless chuckle. Our industrial automation division is losing accounts. Clients are demanding integrated monitoring, predictive service contracts, remote diagnostics. We're still essentially selling hardware like it's 2005. Elias waited, his expression neutral. Victor tapped a finger on the holographic folder floating before him. Your platform, GridWise AI, is superior to anything we've attempted to build internally. Hearing that from him, from Victor Sterling, should have felt like a triumph, a moment of profound satisfaction. It didn't. It felt strange, like receiving a compliment from a locked door after you'd already painstakingly climbed through the window. Victor looked directly at Elias. We'd like to acquire GridWise AI. He then slid a printed proposal, a physical document, across the polished table. The number at the top was so substantial that for a second, Elias heard nothing but the faint hum of the office's distant server farm. He thought about every sleepless night he'd questioned his sanity, every desperate phone call from creditors, every school event he'd missed, every time Leo had bravely pretended not to care when his mother canceled a video call. That number, staring up at him from the page, could have ended all of it. Cleanly, unequivocally. He could have sold, cashed out, and never worried about another payroll spreadsheet again. Victor watched him read, his expression unreadable. That's a serious offer, he prompted. It is. Elias agreed, his voice steady. You've earned it. Elias looked up, meeting Victor's gaze. That's rather kind of you to say now. Victor's jaw shifted almost imperceptibly. Elias, I know we didn't see it when you were at Sterling and Associates. No, you didn't, Elias confirmed, a quiet truth in his words. Victor nodded once. Fair. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then Elias slowly closed the folder and pushed it back across the table. I'm not selling. Victor blinked, a single unhurried blink, as if his brain needed an extra second to process the unexpected refusal. May I ask why? Because I didn't build GridWise AI so Sterling and Associates could simply affix its logo to it and bury the parts that make it uncomfortable. You wouldn't bury it, Elias continued, his voice gaining strength. You would soften it, slow it down, add committees, insert 5 VPs between a factory floor problem and a critical decision. He looked out through the glass wall at his engineers, heads bent over their work. That's a cynical view, Victor challenged. It's an experienced one. Victor's mouth tightened then, slowly, relaxed. So, what do you want? That was the moment Elias realized the true shift in their dynamic. 8 years earlier, he had sat across from Victor, desperately hoping his former mentor would understand his vision. Now, Victor sat across from him, needing an answer, needing his answer. Elias folded his hands on the table. A partnership. GridWise AI remains independent. Sterling and Associates becomes our largest hardware integration partner in North America. We gain access to your established client base. You gain a technology platform your customers already trust. Victor studied him, a complex mix of surprise and grudging respect in his eyes. You'd rather own a smaller company than sell for generational money. Elias thought of Leo, asleep on the office couch, that old blanket pulled up to his chin, a silent testament to their shared journey. I already have what matters, he said, his voice soft but firm. Now, I'm protecting it. The negotiations stretched for months. Lawyers in 3 time zones, endless revisions, video calls at dawn and well past midnight. His team, particularly Amelia, handled the bulk of the minute details. Elias deliberately minimized his direct involvement, not out of any grand plan to hide from Victor, but to prevent ego from clouding the deal. Amelia was brilliant, calm, surgically precise, utterly impossible to bully. Whenever Sterling's attorneys pushed too hard, she would smile into the camera and state, "That won't work for us," in the same unyielding tone someone might use to decline an unwanted extra topping on their synth meal. Elias mostly stayed out of sight, immersed in product development, customer feedback, and, most importantly, ensuring he was present for Leo. But during one particularly late video call, he saw something that made his hand freeze over his notebook, the pen digging into the paper. Victor was in his Viridian City office. Behind him were framed blueprints, a polished obsidian bookshelf, and a glass wall looking out toward the executive floor, Elias used to walk past every morning. Victor turned away from the camera for a moment, saying, "Give me 2 minutes." A woman passed behind him, carrying a sleek leather data bag and a white lab coat draped over one arm. She was on screen for perhaps 3 seconds, no more. But Elias knew the way she moved, the subtle tilt of her head, the meticulously maintained posture. Serafina, his ex-wife. For a second, Elias forgot there were 6 other people on the call. Amelia's voice, calm and professional, came through his speaker. "Elias, are you still with us?" He looked down at his pen. He had pressed it so hard into the paper that it had torn through. "Yes," he managed, clearing his throat. "I'm here." He didn't ask Victor about it. Not then. Not later that day. But that night, after Leo had gone to bed, Elias sat alone in the kitchen of their Neo-Kyoto apartment and opened the shared custody calendar Serafina, and he still maintained. Her email signature had changed a few months earlier. New consulting role, Viridian City, industry relations. He searched her name. There they were. A photo from a charity gala. Victor Sterling smiling beside her, his arm casually around her waist. Serafina, in a striking black gown, wore the same diamond earrings she used to reserve for their anniversaries. The caption identified them as esteemed guests of honor. Elias leaned back in his chair and laughed once, a quiet, disbelieving sound that barely escaped his lips. Not because it was funny, but because life had finally become too bizarre, too intricately ironic to take seriously. The woman who had left him, because she refused to risk her future on his struggling company, was now dating the man whose monolithic corporation desperately needed his company to survive. You couldn't have scripted a cleaner, more poetic twist if you tried. Still, Elias cautioned himself. Bitterness was easy, discipline was harder, so he did nothing. No message, no confrontation, no late-night email that would feel satisfying for 5 fleeting minutes and utterly foolish by morning. A few weeks later, a cream-colored, substantial envelope arrived at their Neo-Kyoto office. Real paper, embossed lettering. Amelia dropped it on his desk. "Looks expensive," she commented, raising an eyebrow. Elias opened it with a letter opener Leo had bought him for Father's Day, a miniature blunted replica of a traditional Japanese katana. Global Tech Innovation Gala, the Lumina Tower, Chicago, GridWise AI. Recipient of the Global Predictive Analytics Award. He read the letter twice. Amelia leaned in the doorway. "Well, we won." Her eyebrows rose further. "The big one." "The big one," Elias confirmed, a quiet pride blooming in his chest. Amelia grinned. "You're going?" Elias looked at the invitation, then at the glittering skyline beyond his office window. Chicago in November. Industry titans, global press, Sterling and Associates executives Victor, and, quite possibly, Serafina. Every sensible, pragmatic part of him screamed to send Amelia in his stead. But some moments weren't about revenge. Some moments were about simply standing where life had tried to knock you down, and allowing the truth of your journey to arrive, unadorned, without you having to raise your voice. "Yes," he said. "I'm going." 4 weeks later, Elias stepped into the breathtaking ballroom on the 88th floor of the Lumina Tower in Chicago. A plain black suit, feeling utterly inadequate amidst the opulent surroundings. He carried his presentation data slate under one arm. The automated chandeliers cast a warm golden light over round tables dressed in pristine white linen. The faint chime of crystal glasses mingled with the quiet clink of silverware. Men in bespoke suits leaned close, trading hushed industry gossip. Women in dazzling evening gowns moved through the room with an effortless grace, appearing to belong to a different world than the one Elias had clawed his way through to get there. He had taken perhaps 10 steps inside when he saw Victor near the front, already engaged in conversation. And beside him, radiant in a deep emerald green gown, stood Serafina. She turned at the exact same moment he did. For one fleeting second, her face was a blank slate. Then recognition flickered, settled. Her lips curved into a small, confident smile, the kind people wore when they were absolutely certain they knew how a story would end. Elias saw Serafina before she saw all of him. That sounded strange, he knew, but it was true. At first, she only registered the familiar, comforting fragments that made sense to her. A middle-aged man in a simple black suit, standing somewhat awkwardly near the edge of a ballroom, a data slate tucked under one arm, looking a little tired from travel. Not the award-winning founder, not the innovative leader, just the man she had left behind. The ballroom at the Lumina Tower felt warm, imbued with that polished, exclusive hotel ambiance. Automated chandeliers glittered above, casting shimmering patterns on the marble columns, and seamlessly moving waiters glided between tables with trays of sparkling synth wine. Everything seemed to possess an unnatural sheen, the silverware, the gleaming floor, the women's exquisite jewelry. Even the smiles had been buffed until they looked expensive. He had barely walked 10 feet inside when an elderly hotel employee near the stage fumbled a stack of presentation programs. They slid across the plush carpet in a neat little cascade of glossy paper. A few attendees glanced down, then simply stepped around them, resuming their conversations. Elias didn't think. He simply bent down and began to help the man gather the scattered programs. "Thank you, sir," the employee said, his face etched with embarrassment. His name tag read Arthur. "No problem," Elias replied softly. "I've dropped worse things than paper." Arthur offered a grateful, genuine smile. For a few seconds, Elias was simply on one knee in a lavish ballroom collecting glossy programs, while men in custom-tailored tuxedos discussed market share and quarterly projections above his head. That was when Serafina's voice reached him. Well, one word, soft tinged with amusement, yet sharp enough to make his hand pause on the carpet. He looked up. She stood about 6 feet away, still in that stunning deep green gown, one hand resting lightly on Victor Sterling's arm. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, styled carefully to frame her elegant face. The same diamond earrings from the charity photo, the same confident expression she wore when she had already arrived at a definitive conclusion. Victor looked down at Elias, then at the programs in his hand. For a split second, confusion flitted across his face. He knew Elias, of course, but the moment was awkward. Public. Serafina was watching. Other executives were nearby. And Victor Sterling, for all his polish, had always been a man who waited to see which way the prevailing winds of power were blowing before he committed a step. Serafina smiled, a slow, knowing curl of her lips. "I have to admit," she said, her voice carrying a delicate, almost condescending amusement, "this is not where I expected to run into you." Elias stood slowly, his left knee protesting with a familiar ache as he straightened. Arthur reached for the last program, but Elias handed it to him himself. "Good evening, Serafina." Her eyebrows lifted, a subtle acknowledgement of the calmness in his voice. "Elias." Victor cleared his throat. "Elias," he said carefully, "I didn't realize you were attending tonight." That was true enough. His legal team knew GridWise AI would have representation. The award committee knew. Amelia knew. His assistant knew. But Elias had deliberately stayed off the final public schedule for as long as he could, partly because he disliked ceremonies, and partly because a small, honest part of him still wanted to avoid precisely this moment. "Well," Elias said, a faint smile playing on his lips. It was a long flight. Serafina looked at the stack of programs in Arthur's hands again, then at Arthur, then back at Elias. He could almost see the story constructing itself in her mind. Not a question, a verdict. She tilted her chin just slightly, a gesture of casual dismissal. "So," she said, lowering her voice as if she were doing him a profound favor, "you're working events now." Elias heard the sentence clearly, but for a second his mind drifted elsewhere. Back to their old kitchen in Viridian City. The rain drumming on the windows, the divorce papers stark on the granite island, Leo's toy drone bumping into his shoe. He felt the familiar, old sting, but it didn't arrive as anger. It arrived like a bruise from years ago, a phantom ache that still knew precisely where to hurt. "No," he said, his voice quiet. "Just helping someone." Serafina laughed softly under her breath. "Of course." Victor shifted uncomfortably beside her. "Serafina," he said quietly, a warning in his tone. But she was warmed up now, in her element. That was always how she became when she believed she held the upper hand. She wouldn't shout. She would trim you down with little neat cuts, all while pretending she was simply being honest. "I have to say," she continued, her gaze unwavering, "I didn't think Neo-Kyoto would bring you all the way back to hotel work." A couple standing nearby, their expensive drinks forgotten, glanced over, drawn by the thinly veiled malice in her tone. Elias felt a flush creep up his neck, not from shame, but because for one ridiculous second, he wanted to defend himself. He wanted to blurt out, "Do you know whose name is on half the banners in this room? Do you know the contract your boyfriend spent 6 months desperately chasing? Do you know how many nights our son watched me nearly fall apart and still, miraculously, believed in me?" Instead, he looked at Arthur, who was standing frozen, the stack of programs pressed to his chest, clearly wishing the polished marble floor would open up and swallow him whole. Elias gave the elderly man a small, reassuring nod. "You're all set, Arthur." "Yes, sir," Arthur said quickly, his voice a grateful whisper. "Thank you, sir." Serafina heard the "sir" and missed the true meaning entirely. Her smile widened, a triumphant, almost cruel gesture. "I knew you'd end up serving people." There it was. The line she had probably been saving, unconsciously, for years. Victor's mouth tightened. He didn't laugh. Elias would give him that. He cleared his throat, but he didn't correct Serafina either. And that, Elias realized, told him plenty. For years, Elias had wondered if he would feel a profound, cathartic satisfaction if life ever presented him with a moment like this. Some perfectly orchestrated setup, some clean, undeniable chance to make her regret everything. But standing there, his knee aching, jet lag a heavy shroud behind his eyes, he mostly felt tired. Tired of being judged by people who only understood the comfortable confines of safety. Tired of being measured by old, outdated versions of himself. Tired of carrying every insult, every dismissal like a meticulously kept receipt he might one day need to present. He looked at Serafina, truly looked at her, and said, his voice genuinely soft, "I hope you're doing well, Serafina." That, ironically, seemed to irritate her more than if he'd snapped back. "I am," she said, tightening her hand around Victor's arm, her grip possessive. "Very well, actually." "I'm glad." Victor studied Elias with a strange, contemplative look, as if he was only just beginning to realize that silence could at times be far more dangerous than anger. Before anyone could utter another word, a tall man with silver hair and a booming voice stepped onto the stage, tapping the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, his voice reverberating through the opulent ballroom. "Welcome to the Global Tech Innovation Gala. And now, for our most anticipated award of the evening, the Global Predictive Analytics Award." A spotlight swept across the room, momentarily blinding Elias. He saw Serafina's eyes, wide with surprise, then flicker with dawning realization as the spotlight settled not on Victor, but on him. "This year, we honor a company that has revolutionized industrial efficiency through groundbreaking AI. The announcer continued, his voice full of gravitas. "A company that started with a vision, endured immense challenges, and against all odds, proved that true innovation stems from unwavering belief. Please join me in congratulating GridWise AI." The applause began as a ripple, then swelled into a thunderous roar. Elias felt a hand on his shoulder, Amelia, beaming. He looked at her, then back at Serafina, who now stood frozen, her confident smile utterly gone, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Victor, too, stared, his carefully composed facade crumbling. Elias walked towards the stage, the aches in his knee, and the fatigue in his eyes momentarily forgotten. He passed Serafina and Victor, their faces etched with a mosaic of shock, confusion, and something that looked suspiciously like dawning regret. He didn't gloat. He didn't even slow his stride. As he reached the stage, the applause reached a crescendo. He gripped the heavy award, the cool medal, a comforting weight in his hand. He looked out at the glittering faces, the flashing cameras, the sea of industry leaders. He thought of Leo, building Lego space stations, of the words on the whiteboard. "Dad doesn't quit." His voice, when he spoke, was clear and steady, amplified throughout the ballroom. 8 years ago, I embarked on a journey that many, including those closest to me, believed was a fool's errand. They saw risk, they saw potential failure. I saw possibility, I saw a better future. This award," he lifted the gleaming trophy, "is not just for me. It's for every dream that was almost abandoned, for every quiet night spent building, learning, believing. And most importantly," he paused, his gaze sweeping over the audience, "it's for my son Leo, who taught me that the greatest measure of success isn't the size of your company or the zeros in your bank account. It's showing up. It's being present. It's never quitting on what truly matters. As the applause surged once more, Elias glanced towards the side of the stage. Arthur, the elderly hotel employee, stood there, a wide, genuine smile on his face. He caught Elias's eye and gave him a thumbs up. Elias returned the smile, a silent acknowledgement. He had helped someone, and in that moment, standing under the bright lights, holding his hard-won trophy, he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he was serving something far greater than any hotel, any corporation, or any past version of himself. He was serving a future built not on fear but on an unwavering belief in dreams, no matter the age.